So
All right.
first thing we're going to do, man, is I'm just going to go in here and do an open global file and go to one of the base calibrations that they just, throw in here out of the box. So we're on Ford, small block. And honestly, it really doesn't matter which one of these we pick, but I'll go ahead and start with their turbo tune. But any of them will work just fine. The bulk of what you're going to do in your tune is in these 5 categories right here. They call these like individual config files, ICF. Like if you're reading documentation, they talk about ICF. That's what they're talking about. There's an individual config file for fuel, for sensors, for system, one for each of these things. And then you can turn on an advanced one too if you want to. So anyways, we're just going to kind of walk through these. Usually start right here and on the EFI section, and then just kind of work our way down the list. So you did just the regular Terminator X, not the Max, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And engine, what's your cubic inches on this deal right now?
347.
Okay. So we'll just dump that in here. This tune's basically already set up as like, V8. It's already got the right firing order for small block Ford and all that stuff. So don't have to mess with a whole lot there, but got that set at 347. And then what injectors are you running in the car?
The Deca 60s, Siemens 60s.
Okay. Yep. So one of the differences they have between version 1 and version 2 of this software is they added some more injectors on this version 2. So those Decas are actually in the list now. They were not in the version 1 software. And then what do you got your fuel pressure set at right now?
43.
And is that with the vacuum line off the regulator when you measured it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. So I'm going to leave all that exactly where it's at then. And that's really all we have to do in here as far as telling it about your fuel system, because your actual system pressure is 43. And the rating that they built this map out of was out of that rated injector pressure. So really, we shouldn't have to touch anything on this screen, most likely ever. We might at some point get into these injector end angles, but that's like a way down the road thing. So, and most of the time for, just for normal street drive type cars, it's something you probably won't even need to mess with.
Okay.
So anyways, so that's pretty much it on that screen. On the ignition, this is exactly what I was talking about over the phone earlier. Like that's that reference angle, kind of like how you did in Megasquirt, where you can fudge it and you can just kind of bump it that way if your distributor's not quite right. This is kind of the same thing. Like you could fudge this number, but they set it at 10 because that's how Ford did it, originally. And then this inductive delay setting right here, this is a thing I told you that when your timing starts to float up or down when you're doing a static check and you rev it up, this is the number you adjust. And the way you know what to do is when you go to higher RPMs, if your timing goes up, then you need to lower this number. If the timing goes down, then you need to raise this number.
Gotcha.
And really, you'll only raise it or lower it by like 0.1 at a time. Usually with these TFI setups, man, usually this doesn't have to be adjusted. And if it does, it's like maybe 0.1. This is usually actually pretty close out of the box. So with some of the dual sync stuff I've done, it tends to need more tinkering. But on the TFI stuff, it seems pretty much good to go. And you're not running any knock sensors or anything, right?
No.
Okay, cool. So the sensor like scaling and warnings, we're going to tell it somewhere else what your actual sensors are on this car. This is really just here for like your displays, for like if you want it to flash a warning on the screen when a certain thing gets above or below a certain number. That's really what all this stuff is about. So this is all personal preference stuff. If you even want to jack with it, most people don't. Kind of get the tune going. You're not going to be like driving around with the laptop all the time. I usually don't mess with this, but nothing in here actually really affects your tune. It's just it's really just displays, and warnings that you can configure to see yourself. So anyways, we'll leave all that stuff alone. Now on your basic IO, this is where you set it up for your fans. Now, did you say you do have this wired up so the Holley's going to kick the fans on and off?
Not at the moment, but we will at some point here pretty soon. So at the moment, they're just on key on power.
Okay, so they're just running all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, what I think we'll do in the tune then is I'm going to go ahead and leave. It's not going to hurt anything. So we're going to pretend like they're hooked up and ready to go. That way, if you do switch it, you shouldn't have to immediately go jack with the tune.
Yeah, because I'll probably actually do that in the next few days.
Yeah, cool. So basically, it's got it set up for a fan 1 and a fan 2, and it's that harness is kind of already ready to go for it. What thermostat do you have in the car right now?
It's a 180.
It's a 180. Okay. Guys have different fan strategies. I'll tell you what I normally do for this, for a street car, but it's kind of up to you. If you got a 180 thermostat, realistically, your goal is probably to get the car to run between like 180 and 190, kind of in that general range. So what I would usually do is I'll set fan 1 to kick on about 5 degrees below whenever I want the thermostat to open. So in your case, like probably around 175. And I know theoretically that means the fan's going to be running pretty much all the time once the car's at temp. I get it. I understand that. It's, people say that, oh, it's not good for the fan or whatever, but I like the car to run cooler. And these things do have a tendency to creep pretty quick on you if you're, wait until 190 or 195 to kick on the fans. It's real hard for these systems to, usually pull themselves back down. So I'm going to set fan 1 to kick on at 175. And then I'm going to tell fan 2 to kick on about let's go to 188. That sounds like a really awesome number.
They run all the time anyway. So right now. So yeah, that's perfect for me.
Cool. And, and then as far as the off temperature, usually what I do is I'll set for the higher temp fan like this. I'll tell it to kick off just a couple degrees above when the other one's kicking on. So maybe something like, 178. And then on this one, we'll go down like 10 degrees from when it kicks on. So if it does manage to cool itself back down to 165, the fan will shut off. And then the secondary fan will kick back off at 178. But realistically with the 180, I don't see the car dipping back below 175 at all, unless it's just like winter, that kind of maybe happens. But, so this way, at least one fan's running all the time. And most likely they'll kind of both stay running most of the time once it's up at 10. Okay. So, and then you also have here your air conditioning stuff. So if you're going to wire up the Holley like the way you're supposed to with like that for the IAC kick and all that stuff, then this works. This is actually pretty important, man, because like I said, the Holley's idle control is not very good, in my opinion, out of the box. And it's going to be a sort of a chore to get everything real dialed in the way we want it anyways. And then you throw an AC in the mix and it all goes to shit real quick. So what we got to do is we got to leverage this IAC kick. Now, the way Ford did this is kind of interesting. All of Ford's idle air measurements were based on airflow, not based on like what percentage duty cycle. That's not really how they did things. So when the AC kicked on, they would put 0.05 pounds per minute of air additional through the idle air valve. But how do you turn that into a percentage? So so what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to open up over my other software. I'm going to open a stock tune, like a stock A9L tune, and we're going to go crunch the numbers real quick, and we'll pick a number to put in here. So that's going to be a GUFB. And we're going to go stock A9L. Okay, that's your idle air valve. That's a stock idle air valve and how it behaves. So basically what you're seeing on this chart is as you go to the right, that's the duty cycle. So far left is 0% idle air. Over here is 100%. And you see that like it doesn't really do anything for a while. Like it kind of starts to flow higher, and flow is top to bottom. So the higher the number, the more air it's flowing. The lower the number, the less air it's flowing. So you see how it like ramps a whole bunch of it in, and then it kind of flattens all through here. And then it kind of has this weird ramp up here. So basically to get the first 0.05 pounds per minute, we would have to have the duty cycle at 0.18. So
Wow.
18% duty cycle. If we're talking starting from a closed valve, because remember, your idle's going to be, we're going to set you up where it idles with no idle air under normal circumstances,
Gotcha.
right? So
Yeah.
if you want to get from 0%, you want to get 0.05 pounds per minute, you open at 18%. And that's how you get there. And that's how you'll do exactly what Ford did. And then you can tailor it from there. Because, right, you know, it's like, it's not going to be perfect.
Cool.
So I'll round it down a little bit. I'm going to call it 15%. And then, you know, we'll go from there.
Okay.
You know, and then there's the shutdown where it'll turn off the AC if you go, you know, above a certain throttle percent. I'm going to go a little higher than 50. I'm going to put that at like 65% throttle.
Yeah, sounds good.
You know, you really only need it off when you're truly to the floor. So that ought to be about right there. And then you can have it auto shut off if the car starts to overheat. So I'm going to drop that actually way down to like 215.
Sounds good.
I'm not tripping at 215, but I'm on edge for sure. Like I'm really paying attention at 215.
Yeah, me and you both.
I mean, you're probably not going to break anything, but it shouldn't be up there for any extended period.
I start to freak out at 210. So,
well, really, I start to not be happy at about 200 is where I'm like,
yeah.
And then it gets to about 205. I'm like, oh shit, something's going on.
So Matt, while we're doing this real quick, I got a question for you because I'm sure a lot of people want to know, what can we put in place so that we can limp the car if need be once we get to around the 200, like 210 mark or something? But what's a good safety measure that we can put into place?
Yeah, let's go ahead and just pop in there and do it right now. So up here in your timing area on the tune, you have timing versus coolant temp and timing versus air temp. Now, one question I have is, where is your air temperature sensor on this engine?
It's still in a stock location.
Okay. So here's the deal on that, man. You know, Ford, because that's obviously the Ford location. Ford didn't really do much as far as pulling timing based on air temp. They did most of their adjustments based on coolant temp because it's a little bit more reliable and it's a little bit stronger indication of what's really going on with the motor. So Holley gives you this table right here. That's just a modifier. It doesn't matter what your normal timing would be in the normal timing table. It will modify that number based on coolant temp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rescale this because Holley does a very poor job out of the box. So I basically, the low temp is negative 40 degrees. The highest temp is 260. Now I'm selecting all the way across here. And I'm going to fill in the row values. And what that does is it just evenly distributes, every cell all the way across until we get from point A to point B. So now it's just 20 degrees per column. And let me show you what Ford did on that since I've got this stuff sitting right here. So Ford, there's kind of a couple things they do with coolant temp. So first thing they do is when you're not full throttle, but just part throttle, normal driving stuff, this is how Ford did things. So they added a whole bunch of timing when your engine's really cold at like 60 degrees or below. And then they pretty much take all that out. And then when the car starts to go above 196 and you're kind of at higher loads, they start pulling a degree or two. And then if you really start to get hot at like 230, they pull out 4 degrees pretty much anytime you're in the throttle. So what I like to do is kind of build something real similar to that. Now, if you're all the way up at 260, I'm gonna pull 12 degrees of timing. Something stupid, right?
Yeah.
Like I want so much timing to come out of it that even if you didn't know your car was overheating, you're like, why is my car running like shit? And you're going to start looking around at things, trying to figure out, why it's doing something.
You're basically creating a limp mode essentially for the car. Pretty
much. Yep. So 240 degrees, it's going to pull 10 degrees timing. At 220, it's going to pull 4 degrees. And then this is where I kind of manipulate this a little bit. So instead of going from 160 to 180 to 200, I'm actually going to give myself a little bit more specifics right here. So what I'm going to do is make it where, let's see, here's 190. So at 190, I'm going to have it pull a quarter of a degree, just barely any change, but just a touch. And then by 200, I want it to pull a degree and a half. And it's kind of rounding the numbers here, but it's actually 1.5 when you're typing them in like that. They just round some of these on the visual. And that's pretty much
Okay.
it, man. Pull a little bit and then start getting pretty aggressive and then just really pull all the timing out. And then on the other side, we're going to go up with the timing. So Ford, basically Ford was putting, something about like that. And then by like 80 degrees, they're really not doing much. Pretty much we're all good on the IO stuff. Now the closed loop learn, this is really the lifeblood of Holley's fueling system. This is their whole self-proclaimed, auto tuning, self-tuning, self-learning, whatever. This is what they're talking about. And, Holley's closed loop fuel correction is pretty good. It has a couple quirks like we talked about earlier, man. Like if you're going full throttle and then you pedal it a little bit and then get back in, it's going to drop out of closed loop for longer than you wish it would. So it's a little weird there. And it does when early on in your tune, when your tune's like really bad on fuel, it's just way off. They have a tendency to pretty drastically overcompensate. So when you get out of that condition, it kind of has to overcompensate back the other way. So it's a little rough, but hey, it's, if it's not tuned, it's going to be rough anyways.
Okay.
So anyways, in order for the system to learn, which is on this part of the screen, and it is turned on right now, it first has to have closed loop turned on. If closed loop is not turned on, it can't learn anything. Because closed loop is kind of the instant corrections it's going to make. Learning is sort of like the trending, like, oh, it seems like we're really staying rich and we're really rich. Okay, well, let's go and learn to fix that permanently, that kind of deal. But learn gets its data ultimately from closed loop. So we want both of these turned on. We're not going to use any of these other triggers, like unless you have a really big cam or some other unique reason, to not have closed loop at idle. Let's use closed loop at idle. It's going to run better that way. So I don't like to put like an RPM limit or a throttle position limit or anything like that. I just want it to be on all the time.
Okay, that's cool.
At least early on in the tune. Yeah.
So what is it? Is it set that way, like from the factory? Because I didn't pay attention right there. Or did you change that? So was it normally like 160 degrees or so?
No, these are all their factory settings. Now there is a hidden setting that they don't show you, and it's not adjustable. It's what it does. Your learn will not kick in until the car's up to full temp or close to it, 160 in this case. So closed loop, it can start making those corrections even on a cold engine. It has to wait for the O2 to heat up, and then it'll and after start enrichment has to be done, which usually only lasts 10 to maybe 30 seconds, depending on how you set it up. And then once that after start enrichment's finished, closed loop will kick on. It'll start adjusting, but it's not going to start applying learning until it gets above 160. Because the fueling requirements are very different on a cold engine, so they don't want it to try to learn bad habits before it's fully warmed up. So that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Ford's learning kicked on at 170, so it's close. So now this stuff right here, this is really important too. Down the road, this is the minimum and maximum amounts it's allowed to compensate. Like what fuel percent correction up and down is it allowed to do? So the way you read this table is like if you're, say you're at 80 kPa at 1,000 RPMs, you'd be right in this area. And so if you're in this area, it's saying it's allowed to add up to 50% fuel and take away up to 50% fuel. So like if we drop all these numbers to like 10, it would only be allowed to adjust up to 10% up or down from whatever the tune called for. So early on, fuel's going to be way off. You want to leave these ranges really high, but as the tune gets better and better, you need to start dropping these numbers down. Because if the tune is like legit dialed in, I don't see a reason to let this compensate more than 10% in any condition. Because if it's trying to do more than that and your tune is really dialed in, it's probably your O2 sensor failing or some other, an exhaust leak or something else, and it's not even a real problem. So anyways, day one on the tunes, unless you got a huge cam, which let's talk about that actually. I don't know what cam's in the car again.
It is the Comp Cams XE274HR, and I can't remember the specs right off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really common cam. It's, it's not a baby cam, but it's nothing just super radical. So it doesn't have enough overlap in it to totally piss off the O2 sensors and the closed loop system. So yeah, we should definitely be able to leave that on. And then learn, same thing, man. I'm going to leave all this default settings, but the big thing is it needs to be turned on, which you check here. Same type of limits. How far are you allowing it to learn up and down? You could change this and tighten up that window down the road. And then this gain right here is important. This is how fast does it learn. So you go 0 to 100%. 100 is saying learn really, really quickly, which you kind of want it to early on. As things get better, you probably want to turn down that sensitivity. You know, maybe 40 or 50% down the road is going to be a lot better place once the tune's pretty close. But early on, let's just get some rapid information and, you know, move on with it. So
gotcha.
So I like to leave the gain high for now, leave all these defaults, all that, tighten this window over time. Variable cam, that, you know, that doesn't apply to us. This is your per cylinder fuel and timing that you can make adjustments. Obviously right this second, we're not in a position to do anything with this. But again, if you feel like almost every single thing is dialed in and now you're trying to go for that last little whatever, man, if you got one plug that's reading rich or lean compared to the others, go in here and bump the fuel, you know, that's what it's here for. But that's, your tune's going to have to be good. You're going to have clean plugs and the whole deal. And, you know, that's down the road.
All right. I got you.
All right, man. So that's really all we got to do for that area of the tune. On the sensors, you said you do have the HOLLEY 3-bar, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then on your coolant and air temps, those are just the ones that came with the Fox Body HOLLEY kit?
Yes.
Okay. So that's kind of how this is set up out of the box. And then are you planning to add oil pressure or fuel pressure?
Yes, they actually came in today. Something I got off Amazon that had some pretty good reviews, so I figured I'd give it a try. They're like $20 a piece.
Yeah, it's those Autex.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, let me, I can't ever remember that data off the top of my head. Let me pull that up real quick. Okay, yeah, there we go. And it's the 100 PSI ones, right?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, so we'll go ahead and set that up. So for those, since that's not in their drop-down list, we'll go to a custom. And then we just have to put in the curve. So it's voltages across the bottom. And basically what this is telling us is this thing goes from 0.5 volt to 4.5, and it's linear. So 0.5 volt is going to be 0 PSI, 4.5 volt is 100 PSI, and it's just a straight line between the two. So all we got to do here is I'm going to drop us with a 0.5 volt. I'm going to put a 4.5 volt mark there. I'm going to do that same thing we did earlier where I just fill the row values so it draws straight lines between them. I'm going to set that at 0 PSI, 100 PSI, and then from here to here, fill row values, straight line. So,
sweet.
And actually, this is another weird quirk of the HOLLEY. You actually cannot tell it that you have no sensor for oil or fuel pressure. You have to choose something. So even if you don't have one in there, your readings are going to show up on your gauge like there's an error, there's some kind of problem, or sometimes they show like negative pressure. It just sort of fluctuates around with like, that's why, because you can't just tell it I don't have a sensor. Anyways, that's that. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for this one. Custom pressure, 0.5 volt, 4.5, straight line, 0, and straight line. So yeah, you're still going to get some bogus readings for now, but whenever you do hook them up, you're good to go.
Sounds good, man.
All right, so that's it for the sensors. Easy, not much to do there. So now we got to talk about idle, and this is where these cars, it's just a very sensitive topic for me. Now on your idle air valve, which idle air valve are you using?
Yeah, it's a factory Ford pulse width modulated regular valve.
Yeah.
I think I got it from AutoZone.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, basically we just go in here, we'll set that to 5-liter Ford, which is a pulse width modulation. 315 is the number I keep coming to in my research, and it's what I've been using, and it seems to work okay. Something that you will notice is if you mess with this number, like the valve is going to work no matter what number you put in, it sort of theoretically, but like I was tuning a guy not too long ago. This is kind of a funny deal. So I was talking him through this stuff over the phone. I said, okay, type in, 315. And he thought I meant 3.15, and I didn't catch it when he was typing it in. So he put in 3.15, but so he goes in there and we load up the tune, whatever. He turns the key on. He's like, what the hell? I'm like, what's going on, man? He's like, hold on a second. He turns the key off, and I can hear the fuel pump prime, and he kicks it back on. I can hear this clicking noise. It's almost like a knock. I'm like, what is going on? It just keeps going. Think about it. 3.5 as your hertz. It's just going to go knock, knock, knock. Yeah, it's how often does the valve open or close with each pulse. So if there's a huge amount of time on each pulse, that's what it does. It's knock, 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 knock. At 315, it's going so fast that we can't even perceive the changes in it anymore.
Gotcha.
So like somewhere in between there, what you'll notice with these valves is like, the idle air valve with the Holley is even going to be running with key on before you start the car. You ought to go out there and listen to what that valve sounds like and try adjusting this number just out of curiosity. Put it at 200 or 100 or 500. It's going to sound different. And sometimes it'll start like really humming, or it'll have kind of like a high frequency whine to it.
Yeah, I've heard that before, actually. I've messed with that, and you're right. It completely changes the sound of it.
Yeah. And like on the Megasquirt stuff you've done in the past, they give you like a drop down list where you have a few like pre-selected frequencies to choose from, but they're pretty big jumps. Here you can put in whatever number you want. So so I've been running with 315, man. I mean, I've heard them in person. I've tuned a lot of them. It seems to control the valve, doesn't have any major issues. So it's, I'm sticking with that.
I guess we need to explain to everybody. I've already, played with the tune, obviously. So, I use 315, and I'm going to be honest with you, man, that stuff worked perfect. Like the car actually idled pretty good. So, yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I think that was somewhere around factory, right?
That's what my research shows. This is one number that isn't actually like in the tune from the factory. So I can't sort of reference that because it's not adjustable in a factory tune. So, but the research I've seen says that's it. So I'm rolling with it, man.
Gotcha.
And then of course the important thing, we have to go in this output and move that unassigned idle air valve to this pin B3, because that's how the Fox Body Terminator harness is set up. You cannot do this from the handheld. You got to do it from the software. So this screws up a lot of people, man. You can do whatever you want with your idle settings. The valve is not going to do anything until that pin gets reassigned. When you open up their base tune, they'll have the fans and the AC shutdown already wired up to those particular pins on the harness, but they leave the IAC unassigned in their CAN tunes. So you have to physically, it's just a drag and drop deal, but you got to bring it down from unassigned into that output B3. And until you do it, the valve does nothing. Like it's not going to do anything. So you have to do this, and you have to do it from the laptop. So if you're just doing a Wizard tune, this is why a lot of guys on their first startup get really defeated, because the car will just start swinging around and it won't hold a stable idle at all. That's why. It's because the valve didn't do anything. Most of those guys actually can't even get the car to start, because you need that idle air valve open even to get air in the car for starting it. And if it's shut down, a lot of times it'll just flood the engine and it won't ever start unless you're pedaling it. So,
Makes sense.
Yeah, unfortunately. So anyway, so that's, the valve will at least work now. Now the next thing we're going to do is tell it what our target idle speed is going to be. Now, this is why I wanted to do these videos with you, man, because, most of the Holley videos I put out already, and it's been a long time, that was when I was pretty new to Holley EFI. I'd done a number of cars and I was kind of feeling my way through it, but I'm always trying to seek how to do things the way Ford did it with whatever platform I'm handed, because Ford's way worked. You just got to know how to do that. It works, right? But the thing is, I fought like hell with this system for about 5 or 6 months trying stuff, because I was trying to make a Holley do what Ford does. Well, the Holley's not a Ford ECM. Like, it's not going to do the same stuff. So if you're trying to force it to be like a Ford, it's not. And you have to accept that. So my techniques here have changed a whole lot from what people saw in previous videos. And this is the stuff I really wanted to see, or at least part of it. So
sounds good, man. And this sorry to interrupt you, but this is definitely the stuff that we need to talk about. me and you have already talked about this, and I tried some of the things that you told me, and wow, did it make a difference. So I'm just going to step back here and let you do this. But anybody who's watching, this is a huge thing here. Trust me.
Yeah. So here's kind of the technique, right? So this is conceptually not wrong. Like cold engine, it's going to need to idle up a little higher. As it warms up, your target idle speed can come down. That's normal. Now, what should the targets be? Stock engine, warm temp was 672 on a Fox body, which honestly is just too low for most people that are, trying to do something with a cammed engine or whatever. But that's where it was factory. And they did the same thing. They were usually, somewhere between like 900 to 1,000 ish kind of on cold temps, and then it would settle in. What I want to do is I want to drop this down just a touch here to we're going to go to 1050 on your full operating temp stuff. I'm going to call that 180 and above. I'm going to set that for right now at 800. And then I'm just going to draw a straight line from here to here. And then I'm going to grab from here all the way over. I'm going to smooth that out. So it just kind of rounds the edges on the curve a little bit and just kind of, blends it in. But from 180 degrees and up, locked out 800 RPMs, that's our target. Now, I don't actually want your car to idle at 800. And this is the important thing. I'm setting this, at least the full temp number here, I'm setting it a little bit lower than where I want it to be. What do I actually want it to idle at? Probably about 850 is I think where we're going to sit on this. So I'm shooting about 50 RPMs low. And this is going to make more sense why we're doing it later, but that's the key takeaway. Decide what you want. And if you're going to follow this technique, set this to 50 RPMs, approximately 50 RPMs lower. Big cams, sometimes I might even go like 75 or 100 RPMs below where it's actually going to be. But with a little bit more mild cam, probably around 50 RPMs below. So that'll be our target there. And we've got the valve wired up. Next thing we got to do is talk about startup, and that's where this IAC comes in. Now, I have an entire video on this subject, and I'm gonna tell you I'll throw it away because this is the new. So, Ford's way of doing stuff, right? At idle, they had that valve way open. The idle air valve would be open about 35-40% at full temp idle, and everything worked fine. They had a whole system built around that assumption. Well, the way we're going to tune this, we're not going to lean on the idle air valve at all for actual full temp idle. It's going to be at 0% duty cycle, not 5, not 10, not 20. It's going to be 0. And what that really means is we're going to have a lot of air coming through the throttle blades. We're going to be cracked open considerably more on the throttle than what Ford did from the factory. Okay. And because of that, if we use Ford's numbers here, you're going to have a massive flare up on the RPMs when the car starts. So like my videos would probably show you something about like this, have you at like about 98% here, have you at 60 through here, and some kind of blend, just rough numbers, something about like that. Well, I'm going to take this whole thing. And one of the things you can do, you probably haven't done this yet. Anytime you're like selecting cells on these tables, you right click and offset selected. You can raise or lower these things by a number, or you can divide or multiply or add. You can do things by percentages. So like if I want to lower all these numbers by 30%, I can do percent minus 30 and hit enter, and everything drops 30%.
Nice.
So little hidden thing, but yeah, that offset selected, when you know exactly what you want to do. I want to add 5 to everything, or subtract 10, or add 10%. I mean, that's your way to do it. Divide by 2, multiply by 2. So anyways, lowered it way down. Now, so that's, considerably lower than it was. I'm going to go even lower. I'm going to drop this down to 40 right here. And then I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of this by hand. A couple other shortcuts I use a lot. When you notice I'm not even really using the mouse for most of this stuff. I just kind of move around. So I'm just arrowing around. But when you hold down the control key and hit up or down, that's going to raise or lower whatever you got selected, either by 1% in most things, or by, something about like that. Kind of depends on what table you're in, but that's small adjustments. And then control right arrow is going up bigger increments at a time. So control right and left, big increments, control up, down, little increments. So I can just kind of go through here and work my tables over the way I want to.
So now explain the IAC parked position. What is that actually doing?
Okay, two things. And this is not going to mess with your car at all once you get it started and you've been driving it around. This has nothing to do with any of that. So if you're having like down the road problems with the car after it's been running, look elsewhere. So all this actually does is when you first go key on, before you start the car, it's going to open the valve to this percentage duty cycle based on, you know, whatever your coolant temp currently is. So if you're like on a cold start this time of year, you're probably hanging around 100, 80, 100, somewhere in here. Hot start, somewhere over here. So this is how far the valve's going to be open on key on and while you're cranking the engine. Now, as soon as the car starts, then what's going to happen is it's going to hold it at this number for some amount of time, and then it's going to start to drop it out over some amount of time, and you have control over that right here. So on your IAC settings, your hold time right now is 4 seconds and your decay is 4 seconds. So it means it's going to hold it at that number for 4 more seconds after the car starts. Then it's going to try to taper it off to 0% over the course of another 4 seconds. Correct. And the thing is, this Holley has some crazy logic in it that when your RPMs are starting to come back down and you finally cross the threshold of wherever your target is, the valve's going to open up 18% instantly, and it's unavoidable. It's what Holley's logic does. So this is a very fine balance. But what I'm going to do for now, I'm going to drop this down to like 2 seconds, and then we'll leave this at 4 seconds. We're going to have to see data logs to really dial this in, and we got to get your fuel dialed in before we can even mess with that. So your startups are probably going to be a little grumpy right now, probably surge up a little high. They might dip and they might kind of have a surge 2, 3, 4 times before it settles out. We will be able to fix that, but it's hard to do it on the first try.
Gotcha.
So that's pretty much your startup right there. And then you've got this hold position, and this is also complete guesswork right now. So it's really not critical what we put in here, but I'm going to drop it down to 25% as a starting point. I'm going to drop this ramp down to 2 seconds. Yeah, let's do 2.5. I'm going to do this number 525, and I'm going to explain this real quick. So whenever you're driving the car and you're actually in the throttle above 2% throttle, and any way you're driving it, the valve's going to be open to exactly this number, whatever you choose. Okay. And then as soon as you come off the throttle, now it's going to start to decay down, but it's not going to start decaying instantly. It's going to wait till the RPMs drop within this many RPMs of idle. So if your target idle is 800, 500 RPMs above that's 1300. So what it's saying is when you come off the throttle, it's going to stay at 25% until your RPMs dip below 1300. Then it's going to start to decay over this amount of time.
Got you. Okay, so that's why it's important to set your TPS up correct. Because if the car's sitting there idling at 3% TPS, it's going to be holding at that position.
Yes, and I see this all the time, man. People are like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I thought everything was good. Car was idling great yesterday, and now it just won't come down. This is so one of two things has happened. Either this number right here is too high and you need to lower it, or this number, you might want to raise it up, or your throttle position is just above 2% because you need to reset the sensor. And that's usually the cause. And the Holleys, I haven't seen a lot of issues with the throttle position sensor getting like inconsistent reads, but with cars of this age, I mean, it's a freaking cable that drives the whole thing. They do stick. The return springs get weird, stuff happens. So it's usually in the cable, to be honest.
Yes, and that is absolutely an issue. I mean, that is a problem. So guys, absolutely pay attention to that. I've had it happen to me many times. You set the TPS and you think everything's good. You hit the throttle a couple of times, you drive it, and you come back and it's at 5%. So, I mean, it may be time for a new throttle cable.
Yeah, another thing it's weird how this happens sometimes. This happened to like a couple different people I was working with in like a week period. But the throttle position sensor itself was starting to come apart. So where it actually sits down on the throttle blade to like connect to it, that plastic right there had started melting and breaking off. So they had some really weird stuff going on in their throttle position, and it caused all kinds of issues because the sensor itself technically worked. It just wasn't making proper contact with the blade. So it would just jitter around and kind of get caught up and stuff. So like Excel enrichment fuel was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. The idle was hanging high. It was, yeah, crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is everything on this screen basically, other than just telling it that it's that type of valve, is all going to have to be adjusted later. And we can't do it till the fuel's more where it needs to be. And we've got some data logs driving around, but this is going to make a world of difference from what the tune's going to do for you today compared to what it'll do once this is right. And so we'll have to go through some sessions on that. Now, this is idle spark is kind of weird in Holley too. And this is extremely difficult for me to describe. It's what's called a PID controller, which trying to make this like simple terms, it's basically just a system that it kind of has an over under to it, right? If we're trying to maintain 800 RPMs, how do we do that? Well, if you dip low, we raise the timing. If you're up high, we lower the timing, and it tries to always reach that center point again. And there's an algorithm or a way of doing that called a PID controller. And this is something that's really not intuitive. You have two numbers you can adjust here. The numbers that I end up with a lot on these is usually I drop this down to like 35 and 55 as a starting point. And it seems to behave a little bit better.
Got you. So that's more of like a slower reaction and then not to overshoot as much, maybe?
That's pretty much what we're going for. Yeah. And one of the things you can do, this isn't ever, you can experiment with this. That's the beauty of tuning. You ought to take a data log someday, just like let the car run up at full temp, do it with whatever settings are in here now, and just let it idle for a couple minutes. Then go in here and change them like crazy, like drop them both to like 10 and log that and see what it does. And then put them both at 20 and put them both at 40. And then maybe try like a 20 and 40 or 30 and 60. And just go back and look at the logs. And you'll be able to tell based on what the RPM's doing and what your KPA is doing on your map sensor, you'll tell what's the most stable. And that's ultimately what you're really trying to do. If the fuel's right and everything else is dialed in, now you're just adjusting this to make your idle as smooth as possible. Unless that's not what you want. Some people don't want a smooth idle. So there's that too.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, this is so anybody coming from Megasquirt will recognize this as the PID, which I think Megasquirt had the option for PID as well, right?
Yeah, and there technically is some advanced modes that you can go into that open up even more control, but it's not for your average, home tuner or self-tune kind of person.
I played around with it, and you can get yourself out of whack real quick, like with this, because it'll overcompensate. It'll shoot too high, shoot too low. So So maybe
when you put some of this stuff at custom, they even tell you, they're like, "You sure you know what you're doing?"
Yeah, I won't be doing any custom stuff.
Yeah, so we can do it this way too. If you want to put in the IAC blanking window and the deblanking window.
I'm good, bro. Let's go.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me make sure that it's still got our pin map too. Okay, yeah, I didn't take that out. So anyway, so this is all kind of guesswork right now. The only thing that really is meaningful is our target idle speed. That's more or less where we're going to want it to be, I think. And the IAC park, this was a good starting point. But if we have trouble cranking the engine over, or it starts okay, but it still flares way up, we're going to make more changes here.
I got you.
All right. This is another one of these big things. Now, I even made a tool for this to make my job easier because I'd have to do this all the time. Realistically, man, like, what's the most boost you're going to put on this car?
The most boost, 15 pounds.
How are you handling your boost control?
Just manual right now, just a manual controller.
Okay, so you're basically, it's a mechanical thing. You're not doing it with like dome sensors or dome pressure or anything like that. Okay, so
not right now,
and you're running just the normal like full on 3 kit, right?
That's correct. 70 millimeter.
Okay, and do you still have their bypass valve or their blow off valve and their wastegate?
Yes, all stock.
Okay,
and I don't get boost creep as of right now, so everything should be good there. It's pretty much dead nuts. Whatever I set it to, pretty much stays.
Okay, all right. That's the big thing. So, there's different ways to think about it. You always want to have on a turbo car. Superchargers are different, man. They're not just going to magically suddenly make 10 pounds of boost more than you wanted. Like, they're pretty predictable. If anything, the belt slips and you get less than you want. but they're not
That's
just going to
right.
do something crazy on you. But turbos, they can creep. So you got to always have a buffer with a turbo. And there's a couple different ways you can do it. One way is like, 15 pounds of boost is basically right here, about just a little over 200 kPa. So theoretically, you're never going to touch this. You ought to rescale the table to make better use of what you can, where you are going to be. But if it does creep up, you probably want to still be able to adjust your fuel and timing above that. So one way you do it is by leaving yourself some extra rows up here, even though you're probably not going to touch them, and you do whatever you think is right. Same thing with timing. Or you can get into some of the other types of boost control, because even though you're not running like dome sensors and stuff like that, it's not going to be boost control. It's not trying to stop the boost, but you can have things that activate to just be a hard set. Like when I go above 15 PSI, pull 5 degrees of timing, and it's just a separate thing. That way you don't have to like consume this table to have that protection, but you still have the protection. So, and then as far as RPMs, man, how far do you think you're going to wind this thing up?
I would say leave it at 7, and let's have that. We won't turn it to 7, probably 65, but I'm not sure yet, to be honest, because we've not played with it. So, but I would like to 7 if possible. Yeah.
Okay. So again, probably actually shifting about 65, but you're giving yourself that little buffer for kind of and with the stick shift car, that's real smart too, because clutches are going to float a little bit when you bang gears. So it's, you shift to 65, it's going to creep a little higher. All right. So here's what I'm going to do, man. Go ahead.
Real quick, because I know this question was asked before. What does Holley do if you go outside of your KPA? If you go way above it and you overshoot, what does Holley do after that?
Nothing. It basically so say you're at 2000 RPMs and you went to 500 kPa. It's just going to keep doing whatever's right here. So if you go above it, it's still doing this, and if you go out to the right, it'll still be doing whatever the last column was.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah. So it's on the timing side of things, you're probably okay with that, because nothing. Well, at least on this side of things, going on RPMs, you're probably okay. Your timing is definitely going to be a problem if you go way above it in the table. So that's something to think about. But in general, though, I mean, it's just going to hold the numbers and do what it's told. Now, that's also kind of one of the cool things about doing things based on VE, because back here we didn't really talk about this, but there are a lot of different models you can use here for how your load sensing is done and how your fuel calculations are performed. So you can run it in a straight speed density mode or alpha N, where there's ways to do things more on throttle position, or you can do it based on VE. When you're looking at your fuel table here, you notice this little conversion checkbox. I can toggle back and forth between 2 modes. So we're generally saying we're tuning in VE, but if I want to see the raw fuel numbers of what is that actually going to produce for me based on my current target air to fuel ratio and whatever the VE is, this is the ultimate fuel flow that you're requesting.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
So this is something else to pay attention to. And also you can toggle between the chart view and the graph view. Now, you're not really going to tune the car from the graph view, but when you're back over here on the base table and you're making all kinds of weird changes, even what looks to be smooth and blended from a color perspective, a lot of times you then go here and you're like, ooh, crap. And you'll see some big, goose egg bumps on stuff and big dips and valleys that are just super abrupt. And this is an easy way to catch that. And then you can kind of, hover around, figure out exactly where you are, where that issue is, and then jump back over to your table and, correct whatever you need to. So there's a lot of back and forth that I kind of double check my work that way. And same thing, man, on the graph, you can go to the conversion mode there, because VE, the shape of that table is a whole lot different than the actual resulting fuel flow.
Yes.
But both of them, this fuel flow right here ultimately should have smoothness to it, because this is what's actually going to happen as far as sending stuff to the injectors and getting what you ask for. VE is just sort of an abstraction of that. So just gotta double check your work sometimes.
I got
so
you.
What I'm going to do, man, is I'm going to copy this whole table and I'm going to go into my Google Drive cheat sheet that I build, that I have a video on too. But I swear, guys, this isn't just me trying to say stuff. I use this every single day. Like every time I do a new tune of the Holly, I have to use this thing. And it just saves me many hours of doing things with the calculator that I don't feel like doing. So let me jump out here. This took me a long time to figure out. So basically the whole gist here is that I can paste in my entire fuel table. Mm-hmm. So paste that in, and then I'm going to grab the two axis values. Mm-hmm. So there's that, and then the RPMs. Copy that and paste it in here. So this is what the fuel table looks like right now. Now we go to the new fuel table, and I could put in whatever numbers I want. So like for yours, if we want to stop going at say 220 kPa, I could just change the number, and all of this stuff just magically updates, but without changing the actual calculation that was in the original table. So like we could do something like this.
So it's automatically scaling and adjusting.
Yeah, it fills in the table based on whatever numbers you want to put here for RPMs and your kPa.
Dude, that's badass.
So you can experiment with it. Yeah, you can experiment with stuff and kind of tinker and see, what you want to do. So basically, I like to spend on a boosted car like this, like a street car. You don't want to have too much of your resolution focused on boost or focused on the not boost. You want to have it probably close to a 50-50. If it's a real low boost car, like if it was only going to do like 6 or 7 pounds, then I would actually take probably 2/3 of this for the normal driving and just have a little bit under boost. People might disagree on that. It is what it is. And, it's just my one guy's opinion, but I like to try to have, most of the table for normal driving, even though it's important to have things accurate under boost. You don't spend very much time there on a street car. So I want the manners. I want the tunability where I, really am going to put the car. So, we can go in here and do some other stuff. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to go from 100 down. Like I was doing them in increments of, 10 kPa here. But I'm going to get a little bit more tight here. So I'm going to do like, I'm going to do every 7 kPa. So we'll do 93.
Now I'm noticing that the fueling numbers look almost identical to the Megasquirt numbers. It's just ironic,
yeah.
I guess. I mean,
yeah, and their calculations are a little bit different, so they're not going to be quite the same, but it's ballpark, the same stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that looks very, very familiar to me. Except like around idle, it looks like there's a lot more number there than in the Megasquirt, but up around, wide open throttle and stuff, man, that looks almost identical to what the Megasquirt did.
See, and that's interesting. So you're calling out this area right here, this idle. You're going a little higher than you're used to, right?
Yes.
I put my money on it, and maybe I'll be wrong, but I bet you it runs real fat here on this tune, and we got to lower it. Holley's base map, I've found to not be very accurate at all for most cars. So yeah, I bet you we end up dropping this down 15 to 20% from where it's at now. But that's fine. We got to get somewhere. So I'm basically, already running it down, and I'm like, well, I got a bunch of extra cells left. So I'm gonna get a little bit tighter with it. We're gonna do like every 6 kPa. I'm gonna run my brain through this again. And it's late in the day, so my brain starts to shut down on me at least a little bit.
Doesn't help when I interrupt you.
You know what? Or I can be smart about this and just say, do what's above me -6 and just copy and paste. Yeah, that works better. Use an Excel formula. All right, well, we ran out again, so we're going to let's do 5 equals that, -5. Yeah, perfect. Down to 10. Realistically, you could go all the way down to 0. It is extremely unlikely you'll ever get below about 9 or 10. Like the only way you can have this much vacuum and be at the very bottom here is like all the way up at red line, and then you just let off the throttle and coast in gear. All the way up at $6,000, you might be at like 8 or 9 kPa, but as the RPMs come down, your kPa is going to slowly go up too. So it kind of moves up and to the left. I'm kind of working my way through here, but ultimately getting back down to idle and just trying to give myself, every couple hundred RPMs for this whole kind of up to three grand. That's a really good amount of granularity to work with. Now, when we get here, this is where things get a little different. And I've started getting a little bit more specific here than I used to. So what I think I would actually like is I want a little bit more resolution right here. So I'm going to do I want to get that by 100 RPMs at a time, all the way up to 1200. So okay. I guess what I'm going to have to do here then is, let's do this. Okay, so that gets us up to 5. Make sure all my math is right here. So 14, 16. Yeah, I like that. So good tunability to 6,500. And then we got just one cell over at 7,000. That's just kind of the overrun.
Okay.
So, and then all the way from 500 RPMs to 1200, we've got 100 RPMs at a time. And this is my concern area right here, is this like 900 to 1200 area, because this is the area when you're coming back down to a stop and you're in that decel and you're about to get back to idle. We're going to need some control here. Now, another important thing, remember when I was setting up your target idle speed at the real cold temps, I had it at 1050.
Yeah.
And then it goes down from there. But 1050 was the highest number. That was very intentional where I put that, because if the target is 1050 and we're achieving it, that's the highest target we're ever going to ask for, and it's relatively stable, you're probably never going to see it go above 1100 RPMs if it's healthy.
Got you.
And then it'll go down from there, because what we're going to have to kind of make a pocket around idle at all different temps and all the different possible idle targets. So I want to be able to have that here, and I want to be able to immediately going above 1100. I want to start ramping in more timing right here so it's snappy. And by 1400, I want to have a lot more timing.
Okay, so we may have to do a little kind of like boxing in, if you will, around the target idle.
Exactly, because even at idle, HOLLEY starts making its timing decisions based on what the base timing table's doing. It's always in play, and then it kind of modifies from there. So yeah, if you have things jumping around too much around idle, it's just all hell breaks loose, and it doesn't work very well at all. So paste in the new table. Grab these guys across here, and I'm gonna paste that in. I'm gonna grab these guys.
Giving away any secrets now, are you, Matt?
It's all public. All public knowledge, man. There's no secrets here.
And tell them if they want to build a table like that, to go right ahead.
That's it, man. Yeah, go for it. So we're kind of having to invent 2 more rows down here that were lower than what the base HOLLEY tune gives you. So I'm just kind of fudging those last numbers for now, and that'll be fine. And then I'll put this back at 7,000. So we have a new table. It's going to be way off, guaranteed. It's going to need adjustment. So I'm really not tripping out about it. It just is what it is. We'll get it loaded up. We'll start fixing fuel. But this matters. This is where you're out of fuel right here, theoretically. Okay. So based on the injector size and pressure you told HOLLEY you have earlier in the tune, they sort of estimate where you're going to run out of fuel. And anything that shows up in white is where you're problematic. And I'll tell you, we've run out of fuel, like run out of injector on cars before with a HOLLEY. This is pretty accurate, man. Like when it starts to really run out is pretty spot on. So
okay, so my theory was 7 pounds, we would still be good. So how close are we at 7 pounds?
Well, 7 pounds is going to be like right here.
You're close.
That's right. Yeah, 7 pounds and 7,000. Yeah. But the thing is, you could turn up your fuel pressure if you got enough fuel supply behind it. And you can get these injectors to go a lot further. That's kind of back to that conversation we had some months ago on that other video. Okay. What we're going to do next is now that we've got our sort of scaling here, the way we want it as far as the map numbers and the RPM numbers, we did this table first on purpose because in your target table, this is just going to be every other one of those rows and every other one of those columns. So until we get this axis the way we want it, this isn't even ready to be messed with, but now it is. Okay. So here's what we're going to do, man. This is, you know, if all things were perfect and we got exactly what we asked for, you might get away with this amount of fuel.
I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts on this AFR table right here? What do you not like about it?
Well, here's what I'm going to start with.